Hey, what's up guys? Guardian here, coming guys with a deck profile today, going over my updated Spectral Duke deck. Yeah, it's been quite a while since this deck's been on the channel. In fact, it's been so long that Spectral Duke got very angry and he's now reversed, and he's now got a reverse form in the form of Spectral Dupe Dragon. Yeah, very cool concept to have Spectral Duke reverse, and it's a very fan favorite card. So seeing a reverse version of it is definitely very, very cool. Yeah, without further ado, let's get stuck into the deck, and I'll show you guys what I'm playing. All right, so before we get into the new card, first we got to go over the original Spectral Duke that came out quite a while ago now. We are playing 4 copies of Spectral Duke Dragon, so we still want to play 4 of him because he is the main right target for the deck. Until we can get to Spectral Dupe for the turn 4. So Spectral Duke, of course, he gains 1000 power as long as you got the Black Dragonite Vortimer in your soul. So he will become a 13k base. And then if your opponent's Vanguard's greater 2 or greater, he gets an additional critical as well. So he's quite a good pressure card on the turn 3 if you can set him up. And also the restanding effect, which he has, which is the end of the battle that he attacks, you can counter blast 1. Retire 3 of your rear guards and then stand this unit, and he gets drive -1 until end of turn. However, if your damage zone has 4 or more cards, so basically limit break, he gets drive +1 instead of -1. Yeah, pretty good. Instead of going minus, you go plus, and you now have a triple drive on the restand, which is definitely very pressurizing. And you know, if you are going second and you have the critical from his first effect, that can be a very deadly turn, so the opponent needs to be very wary of that, and if they're not prepared for it, it can just win games outright. Yeah, 4 copy of Spectral Duke, definitely want to keep playing him at 4, because we need him in order to make the reverse even better. So, for the reverse copy, we are playing 3 copies of Spectral Dupe Dragon. Now, this card is pretty insane, but it is, however, not too great to ride for the first grade 3, which is why we are still playing the normal Duke Dragon. But Dupe is rather interesting. He's got 3 different effects, but it's actually, you know, pretty condensed once you break it down. So the first effect is just during your turn, if your soul has Spectral Duke Dragon, he gets an additional 10k, and then if your opponent's Vanguard's grade 3 or greater, he gets an extra critical. Now, do bear in mind that you are still going to be in the 12k magic number area, since you no longer have the 1k power increase from Duke Dragon. So you're going to be hitting for 12 or 22, basically. So you do need to bear that in mind. But you still get to keep the critical effect as long as you have Duke in the soul. So you still have that crit pressure on the Vanguard swing. And then the second skill is at the end of the battle that this unit attacked, you can counterblast 1, lock 3 of your rear guards, stand this unit, and then this unit gets drive -1 until end of turn. Now do bear in mind with that effect, it's not a once per turn, which means if you have, say, 6 rear guards that you can lock and 2 counterblast, you get 2 restands from this skill. Now do bear in mind that when you do the first restand, you will get drive -1, which means you'll only do 1 drive check on the second one. And then if you restand it again, you will have 0 drive checks on the third swing. So do bear that in mind. However, the last skill, which is something to bear in mind, is that while this unit is in your hand, at the end of the battle that your Vanguard attacked, if you have 5 or more cards in your damage zone, so ultimate break in this regard, you can pay the cost of Counterblast 2, lock 3 of your rear guards, and then ride this unit as stand. And then until the end of turn, this unit's auto abilities do not activate, which means you can't do the restanding effect, basically. So do bear that in mind there. So, that last skill, honestly, it doesn't come up that often, since you do need to be at 5 damage, and you do need 2 counterblast, and you need to lock 3 additional, like, rear guards if you haven't already locked some already. So it is a little bit clutch, but it does have opportunity to come up. It's just not going to happen that often. Honestly, the main effect of this that you just want to bear in mind is the second one, to lock 3 rears, counterblast, and then restand him, and you're looking to do 3 Vanguard attacks with this guy, and basically looking to try kill the opponent, basically. So yeah. So I felt like 3 copies of reverse was fine, just because we don't want to run too many of him, because we don't need him in the early game since he doesn't do anything, and we do want to ride into the Duke first before riding into Dupe Reverse. So yeah, I felt like 3 copies was a healthy amount. So yeah, so doing 3 copies of him. And then the last grade 3 of the deck is going to be 3 copies of Full Cavalier Dragon. So this card's pretty cool just because it's a very simple Soul Blast 1 to look at the top of your deck, call it to the Vanguard circle, and then one of your units on the Vanguard circle get 5k power to land a turn. So it basically just makes your Vanguard bigger, and you know, with the Dupe Reverse, pushing its threshold from the 12k to 17k is still better than what you were doing before, since you no longer have that 13k threshold against force decks. So this extra 5k power can actually help you against those matchups. And also, just in theory as well, with the Cavalier Dragon, it's a way for you to fill your board up without having to spend Counterblast as well. Since we do spend Counterblast in other areas, you know, outside of the dragons, but with this, it's just a very simple get a body to the board and also give your Vanguard 5k. It just really synergizes well with the Spectral Duke and Duper Dragon. You could play Sagramore as well in this slot, but the one thing I didn't like with Sagramore is that he has to be placed from your hand in order to get his skill, to then, you know, draw a card, then call a card. And also, you need a body to call with the Sagramore for that skill, which, you know, you do have plenty of other units that you could call that you don't mind, but I do like the fact that the Cavalier basically just gives you something at random, and it doesn't really matter what it is, because you're mainly just doing that to lock it for the Duke Reverse, basically, or sacking it for the Duke Dragon. So yeah, and like I said, I do like the power gain that this gives to the Vanguard. So 3 copies of him. Alright, and then before we go into the grade 2s, in case you weren't aware, we are not playing Percival in this deck, because Percival actually just got banned recently. So, yeah. We are not playing Percival in the deck, so we are just sticking with those grade 3s, but we do have other stuff to show in here. I'll get to my opinions about Percival later on, so don't worry. So, next for the grade 2s, we have 4 copies of Vortimer, of course, since it's the main ride target of the deck. So if you have the grade 1 Vortimer in the soul, the Scout of Darkness Vortimer, he gets 1k power continuously, so he becomes a 10k, so it makes guarding a bit easier and attacking a bit nicer. But yeah, he has 2 other effects, in that when he's retired from the reguard by your card's ability, you can put this unit into the soul and then countercharge. So it gives you a resource back, so you can build those countercharges and then keep counterblast for the late game for your dragons. And then the last skill is really, really good, which is why this is the main ride target, is that when it's ridden upon by your Spectral Duke Dragon, you look at 5 cards from the top of the deck, and then you call 2 cards from among them to reguard circle, and then shuffle your deck. So, yeah, don't forget you're going to get your Excel 2 when you ride into the Duke, draw a card, and you're also going to look at the top 5 and then call 2 bodies to the field. It's just perfect, right? So, definitely want to be playing 4 copies of the grade 2 Vortimer, obviously with the Duke Dragon. And then next with the grade 2s, we are playing 4 copies of card that I really like in this deck, personally, which is 4 copies of Paramore. Now, when I was looking at cards that could help us get bodies to the field, I felt like Paramore suited most of the needs that I was looking for, because basically you can counterblast and call a grade 2 or less card from your hand to the rear to then draw a card. Now, the main thing I like with this is that if we draw into any of our Din Drains, we can still use them with the Paramore to get a draw, but then we can also refund that Counterblast for that effect with the Din Drain for a Soul Blast. So if we do need the Counterblast still for the Vanguard skills, we can still get them back, whilst also simultaneously getting the draw from the Paramore effect, which is pretty nice. And then also the fact that we can get this draw in the early game as well with something like Din Drain. Maybe we're not after the Counterblast and we just go for the draw from the Din Drain effect. We can actually dig into our deck to try get into pieces for our turn 3. So he's also a pretty susceptible rear guard to have to help us get into pieces as well, which is really cool. Also, he does kind of synergize a little bit with Duke in that when he's called by a card ability, he gets 5k power. So it becomes 14, which is nice. The shield value doesn't really matter. But I mainly play this in the deck for the draw aspect of it, and then calling stuff like Dinsham of our hand to get some value there, whilst also having the ability to get the Counterblast back, which is nice. So, yeah. So 4 copies of Paramore. And then the last grade 2 of the deck is going to be 3 copies of Agraville. So, yes. Percival may be banned, but Agravale is still a good card. And mainly because we like him because he gives us a way to soul charge in his deck. You know, outside of the Vortimer pieces, when they get retired to go into the soul, we need soul for our Dindrains, and also we need soul for the Cavalier Dragon. And bear in mind that you need to keep your Duke Dragon in the soul so that your dupe gets the continuous effect active. So the Agravale does help you with putting bodies back into the soul to then soul blast later for those other skills. And then let's also bear in mind that Agravale is just a really good attacker. On an Excel 2, he's 24, so it gets over defensive anyway. And then also being able to bounce back to hand. It's not too great on the dupe turn, just because you do want to keep bodies on the board. But when you are trying to be a little bit more preservative and keep pieces, you can just return the Agravale back and then put it down next turn to then build your board back up and then have that soul ready to then soul blast for maybe like a Cavalier Dragon or a Dindrain skill. So yeah. And also, just in case, it is also a backup ride target, so if you don't see the Vortimer, you can ride this instead, and the same goes for the Paramore as well. So yeah, 3 copies of Agravale. Alright, and then next we have the grade 1s. We are playing, of course, the 4 copies of the Vortimer grade 1. So this is the main ride target, preferably. It's kind of like Jeffrey from Gurgwit in that you look at top 7 for the grade 2 or the grade 3, so being the Vortimer grade 2 or the Duke Dragon for the grade 3. Add one of them to your hand, and then put the rest back in and then shuffle. So really good for consistency. And then its retiring skill on the rear guard is that when you retire him from a card ability, you can put him into the soul, and then one of your Vanguards gets 5k till end of turn. So not too bad, you know, makes the Vanguard a bit bigger, makes those restands a bit more pressurizing. But yeah, just an overall good card for the deck, and he does synergize with the grade 2 Vortimer for that 10k base. So yeah. And then next we are playing, for the next grade 1, 4 copies of Gorbaduck, so that we can get to our grade 3s as consistently as possible. It's also just a good booster and attacker for the deck overall. Really good behind your Vanguard, you know, making those 12Ks into 25. Very, very solid, and like I said, just consistency boost overall to get to the grade 3s, and also your Heal Guardians. Do remember that, because they are also grade 3. And then last but not least, for the grade 1s, we of course are playing the 4 copies of Dindrain, the good old Dindrain, and yeah, called by a card effect, you Soul Blast to either draw a card, or you can countercharge and get 3k power. But yeah, the flexibility of this card is great. Pairs up very nicely with the Paramore as well, so that you can draw more cards in the early game to get to your pieces, and yeah, hopefully you get to that Duke to then ride on top of a Vortimer. Just very, very solid. So yeah, 4 copies of Dindrain. Alright, so last but not least, we have the grade 0s. We of course are playing the starter with the Spring Breeze Messenger, just the one that I felt like suited this style of Duke overall, so just doing that for the starter. And then we are playing a restanding Vanguard deck, and we want to bash with the Vanguard as hard as possible and kill as fast as possible. So, of course, by saying that, we are playing 8 crit in the deck with the, the Flame of Victory and the Fortune Bell. Just 8 crit, very simple, just bash face with the Vanguard and try kill. And then last but not least, we of course have the 4 Draw PG with Mark, and the 4 Heal Guardian, which, like I said, you can fetch these with the Gorbaduck as well to make the early game a bit nicer. But just bear in mind that sometimes you may not want to use this, since you might want the Counterblast to hold on to for more of an aggro turn with your Vanguard skills. So yeah. But yeah, that is it for the deck. So very quick. I was thinking about doing a video talking about the Percival ban, but I thought it would be more suited for me to do a deck profile update for Duke Dragon, since, yeah, like I said, it's been a very long time since I've actually profiled this deck, and since Percival did get banned from the V Premium format for the time being, who knows if it will return in some regard later on, since I do kind of feel bad for Prominence Core and Bluish Flame as an archetype. You know, maybe they might bring it back at 1 and then restrict it to, like, that archetype. But yeah, for the time being, though, it is gone. And we do not have to play it anymore in our V Premium decks, which is a shame. I did really like the Percival engine with the Agravales, but like I said when we did talk about Agravale, I think Agaville still is solid grade 2, like a foundation level, and it's still just a really good right target and a utility grade 2 on the rear guard as well. And it still finds its place in a deck like this, since it does give it the ability to put bodies into the soul to then feed for soul blast costs later on. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the deck. Some quick thoughts as well about the Percival ban, and yeah, that's all I've got. So I hope you guys enjoyed the deck profile. I'll put a deck log of the deck in the description below, and I will catch you guys in the next one. So, like always guys, this is Guardian285, signing out.